What is the big deal about protein and working out and losing weight? Stick around. We might have some answers for you. Hey, I'm Mike.
And I'm Twain.
Welcome to another episode of 40 Plus Fit, the podcast where we unpack the science of sustainable weight loss and fitness for those over 40.
That's much better, man. That's so much shorter than what we had in all the previous ones.
Yeah,
I
the
like
one where I
that.
have to take a breath before saying, right?
Yeah. The one almost becomes a wrap. And if all of those, whoever's a new listener here, just take a look back and listen back to some of the older ones, and you get what I mean.
Depending on how far back you go, it goes back from a
Depending.
2 minute intro
Yeah.
to a 1 minute intro. Hopefully,
Are
this
we
one
still
gets better.
having the, I'm not so sure at the time of this recording, are we still having the Chinatown music at the beginning?
It's the Asian influence. Yes, for this season, we are going with the Asian
Oh, we're
influence.
still we're still sticking with that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the next
I mean,
season,
let us know
we'll
if you
partake in a
like that,
different
if
one
you
again.
think that we should be cancelled because we are culturally insensitive. Regardless, whatever it is, just let us know, right?
But how can we be culturally insensitive when you're Chinese?
Hey, I mean, you never know, right? I think nowadays,
True, true,
there's
true.
always something that we all can be sensitive about, or going to
Yeah.
that whole PC culture stuff.
Well, let's hope today's
Anyway,
topic is not a sensitive topic because I think this
yeah,
is one that
fortunately,
a lot of people are always wondering about, um, and how to apply it as well in their
yes,
different journeys that they're going on. And this is the not so controversial topic of protein.
yes. Although to be fair, I think in the diet realm, with a lot of diet gurus here and there, a lot of myths being perpetrated. Sometimes even the talk of protein can be relatively controversial.
I suppose that's fair. I thought carbs would be the more controversial one, though.
Yeah, yeah, that too, definitely. And we'll be covering that in a future episode for sure. But today it's all about protein, right?
Today's all about protein. So I thought
Okay.
we'd just start with going about a bit of basics, giving a bit of backgrounds,
Hmm.
like so people can understand is like what is protein?
Yep.
What are the needs? How does it play a part in maintaining muscle or overall health?
Yeah.
So perhaps you can just give us a bit of a foundational understanding there on how
Yeah.
protein plays a part.
Yes, 100%. So simplified down, protein essentially is the crucial element to building the structures for all our cells and tissues. Basically, without enough protein in our body, we cannot repair our body. So in that way, it's the raw materials from which all our cells and tissues are built out of. And when I say cells and tissues, this means, not just like muscle, because everybody thinks protein equal muscle, right? And that's the
Yeah.
first thing we all think about when it comes to fitness. But it also means stuff like your bones, skin, hair, organ tissues, viscera, all these kind of important things that make up our body. And the other thing also is protein actually makes up a lot of other critical components in the body as well. For example, certain hormones themselves are actually proteins that kind of play significant roles in regulating bodily functions. If you talk about in your immune system, right, proteins form antibodies. They are critical components of the immune system itself. So that's defense against, what's the term for that? Pathogens, right, that kind of come into the body. Yeah, so like proteins are just so vital because they are literally the building blocks of life. If we had to distill it down to that one term.
Mm.
Um, and just to get a little bit into the science here, right? So the composition of proteins, because it's easy enough to say like a protein is a protein, but there are different types of proteins. And what this means actually is that proteins are divided into various groups of amino acids. Okay, so amino acids is the more technical term for the things that kind of make up a protein. And they are organic compounds, they composed of in terms of biochemistry, everybody's favorite subject, right? They're composed of like carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur at times. That's why you always get those too much protein, and then you get those like protein farts that really smell really bad. Yeah.
Yeah, we know. I know
But
I'm very well aware of that one.
everybody has been in the gym at one point in time, and then stood next to like some bodybuilder guy or somebody that's big and what, and then suddenly you just get hit by this sulfuric compound in your nose, right? And you're like, oh man, this guy's taking way too many protein shakes that don't agree with their body. But yeah, so amino acids. Back to the topic, right? Amino acids. There are essentially 20 different amino acids, of which I think nine are considered I'm just thinking right now. Yeah, 9. Yeah. I'm just trying to call my basic biochemistry. But yeah, there are 9 essential amino acids. So when you say essential, it just means like these protein compounds are not ones that we can produce in our own body. Okay, and there's a whole bunch of like really fancy names, very long fancy names, leucine, isoleucine, valine, whatever. There's a whole bunch of names that all end with INE. And you can go and Google that. I'm not going to bore you with the technical terms for it, but there are some of these essential ones, which just means that if we do not get them from our diet, we do not have them. And that's why they're called essential. Could we survive even without them? You probably could, but your body would probably not be in the best of shape. Like survivability is a different thing from optimization and like living an actual quality of life. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to always keep that in mind, especially when people are arguing like you don't need this thing or you don't need that thing, or what's essential, what's not. Because then you have to define like where is that level of essentialism, what are you trying to achieve, right?
Mm.
So that's the lowdown. I hope I did a good job there. Do you think that's clear, Mike? Is
I think
that
it's quite clear,
concise
and
enough?
it'll probably lead me on to the next thing then, is, when you
Mm.
have all this kind of protein, does the protein needs change as you get older?
Oh, as we get older, yeah, 100%. I think protein needs themselves change depending on a variety of factors. Of course, getting older is one, mainly because as we get older, our ability to synthesize protein actually drops in the body. That's the aging process. I think we talked about this in a previous episode, right? Where
Yep.
we talk about protein synthesis versus like protein breakdown in the body. And when one rate exceeds the other, it's when aging kind of accelerates. So if your proteins are breaking down, meaning your cells and all the tissues and all this stuff are breaking down at a faster rate than you can regenerate, then that's where we get the visible signs of aging, right? So your skin gets all like dried out and all the nasty stuff that happens with aging, right? Our bones are no longer as strong, our organs don't function as well, all these kind of stuff.
Mm.
So that's essentially why protein needs change as we get older. And I think you were talking about this just before this episode about this myth or this idea that people think they need less protein as they get older. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
They all seem to have this fear of taking in too much protein as they get older because they're concerned that their body can't digest as well.
I,
Mm.
I I think that's probably like a valid concern in terms of, oh, is it harmful to take in too much of like protein? Because again, too much of anything is probably it's probably not so good, right?
Yep.
But of course, it's the degree at which like too much, that level of too much actually is. In fact, as you get older, because of this slower rate of protein synthesis, having more protein available will make it even easier for us to bump up and optimize the rate of protein synthesis. So in other words, if as you're getting older, you actually need more protein versus less. Okay. Now, more is a very ambiguous term, right? It has no actual like quantitative measure to it. So like how much more exactly is that? I think this is kind of where we need to go into a discussion of, okay, what are your actual needs? What's the recommendation? And then how would you differ from the recommendation depending on what you're doing? Yeah.
Mm. I think because I wrote an article on this not too long ago, and
Mm.
you can see, I'll give you the numbers that I got, and you can give
Yep.
me from your experience if this is
Yes.
what you see in the reality too. So the recommended dietary allowance for protein for adults is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, right?
Yeah.
But there are studies that have come and have shown that for adults over the age of 40, especially if you're looking to maintain muscle mass or lose a bit of weight, you need to up that to at least 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, right?
Yeah.
So this is just maintaining muscle mass. This means that you just want to maintain, what is it? The status quo.
Yeah.
Now, if you are involved in any kind of strength training, so let's bodybuilding, strength training, all that, the recommended daily protein intake then jumps to a higher range of 1.54 to 2.2 kilograms
Mm.
of body weight per day.
Yeah. So for those of you who are listening, the entire range just went from daily recommended allowance of 0.8
0.8.
all the way up until 2.2 grams per kilo.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think let's put it into context for people, kind of
Yeah.
what that actually means in terms of the ranges, right?
Right.
0.8 grams per kilo of protein would be something like, let's say if you're a 100 kilo person. Okay, if you're a 100 kilo person, that would be what, 80 grams of protein?
Yeah.
So what's 80 grams of protein? 80 grams of protein in a day for basic survivability and um general health. Let's assume you're not training very hard, you're not doing just you're just a sedentary individual. Just to keep your body relatively well taken care of, that's about 80 grams. Um, that would be something like eating maybe a piece of steak, a 200-gram piece of steak, and having another 3 eggs and having maybe a big cup of yogurt. Let's say a big bowl of yogurt. I think that would be roughly about 80 grams of protein. Yeah. So that can be your starting benchmark of like how much protein you're already taking in. So if you're already not even taking in that amount, you're probably under eating quite a decent bit, right? And then let's say if you bring it all the way up to the top end of that range, 2.2 grams per kilo. Now a 100-kilo person would need 220 grams of protein. And so
Mm.
that's a lot. That's all I can tell you. That's a lot. That's
Yeah. That's a lot of
like
steak.
most of the time, if you're at that range, you're probably not taking everything in from, just like your whole food sources. I mean, we'll talk about protein sources, I guess, later, but
Yeah.
you're not taking everything from like meat and all. You're also taking protein shakes and stuff just to hit that goal. So this range is super wide, right? And I guess maybe the big question here would be, where do I fall on that range?
Yeah. So only you can answer that question, right? Because it's you that's in the lifestyle. So you decide is like, am I still under 40? So I go for the 0.8 and I'm not interested in exercise, all that. I just want to live a
Yeah.
basic life. So I got
Yeah.
the numbers here as well. You gave like very, very I think it's probably very high numbers for the Asian lifestyle. So I broke it down a little bit lower.
Yeah.
So I went for if you weigh 70 kilograms, right? And you just want to maintain status quo, don't want anything else, just hit the bare minimum. You're looking at 56 grams of protein per day.
Mm. Wait. So 56 grams, let's quickly convert that back into like regular foods, right? So 56
Yeah.
grams, let's round it up to 60, just for ease of recommendation. That's 3 eggs, and that's a 200-gram piece of meat,
Or
roughly.
or two medium-sized chicken breasts.
Or two medium-sized chicken breasts, yeah.
That's for the entire day. I don't think I could survive. Anyways, so if we go to the next level up, which is the people over 40,
Hmm.
right? Still weighing in at 70 kilograms,
Yeah.
you now need to hit the range of 70 to 84 grams of protein per day.
And so that's closer to what I was saying at the start, which is your maybe a big, like 2 servings of yogurt. So like a big bowl of yogurt, um, 3 eggs, and 2 pieces of meat, right? 2 pieces of like palm-sized meat, or just like a regular steak. I think that's probably most steaks that they serve you is 200, 250 grams. So you're pretty much covered there. Yeah.
All right. And then we move to the ones that are actually now active in
Mm-hmm.
strength training, bodybuilding, whatever other exercises they're doing, but it's taking a bit of a toll on the body. So you need the recovery.
Yep.
The 1.54 to 2.2 range for a 70-kilogram individual, that is now falling in the numbers of 107 to 154 grams of protein daily.
Yeah.
So what does that
Yeah.
look like to you?
That's really cool. Sorry?
What would that look like to you in a day of eating?
In a day of eating, well, it depends if you're taking protein shakes or not. To be honest, I have some clients that are around that range as well. And usually, I mean, look, like if you're in the Asian context, especially, it's probably easier for you to just grab a couple of protein shakes. So one protein scoop is usually about 20 grams of protein, slightly more, but just for ease of calculation, maybe about 20 grams of protein. So you take what I said earlier, which was roughly about 80 grams to 90 grams, which is one big bowl of yogurt, um, the 3 eggs, one like two medium-sized chicken breasts, or maybe one steak. And then to that, you would add another 3 scoops of protein, roughly. And you would more or less be able to hit that top end of that 150. So anywhere between 1 to 3 scoops extra on top of the initial base recommendation that I just made is probably going to get you to those levels.
Okay.
So I think right now, right, whoever's listening to this, and maybe even just listening to this, right, it's like, okay, that's actually quite a lot,
Yeah.
right?
Fair enough. I can guarantee that when I started out increasing my protein intake, it was a lot.
It takes a conscious effort, I think, because a lot of the cuisine, especially like look, like Mike, you live in Malaysia, I live in Sydney now, right? But like I've been in Singapore my entire life, so I'm very familiar with Southeast Asian cuisine. It's just something you have to be super, super mindful of to make a point to add additional. You're always on the lookout for like, where can I add in more protein? And this is also not just like unique to Southeast Asian cuisine, even though I would say Southeast Asian cuisine has a majority of, or just Asian cuisine in general has a majority of like heavier carb base, right?
Yep.
A lot of rice, a lot of like mixed in dishes with a little bit of protein. Maybe that's more to do with the history and geographical locations, all these kind of very, very interesting deep dives we could go into. But the bare fact is that the cuisine is not really built around protein as a main, as opposed to, let's say, if you go to Europe, if you go to America, protein tends to be a bigger of like mainstay of the meal itself. Like it tends to be the main thing in the meal, and then the surrounding elements are the carbs and the fat components. Most of the time, the protein itself that they eat will generally have some sort of fat component in it as well. So it's not necessarily always a very lean source of protein. It could be like a fattier fish, for example, salmon. They have steak, different types of steak with all the like fatty components to it as well. Yeah.
Mm.
So it's like you have to be very intentional about it. And, having these guidelines, I think, helps to start thinking about how you can implement it into your lifestyle.
You've been touching on the next topic that I wanted to chat about,
Oh,
quite
yep.
a fair amount there. But before we jump into our protein sources,
Hmm.
I think it's also good to just address the misconception of a one size fits all protein requirement.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
So how would you actually categorize that? Because this would also depend on a couple of things. Like one could be, like we addressed it, your activity level. If you are doing strength
Hmm.
training or anything like that, your
Yep.
protein needs are actually a lot higher due to the recovery phase and the rebuilding after such strenuous workouts.
Yep.
Also, if your muscle mass, I mean, those that
It
have
is
more
higher.
muscle
You
mass
probably
would
will need a
require
bit.
more,
Yeah,
right?
you probably will need a bit more.
And then the other condition that would also play a part here is just looking at overall health, right?
Yes.
Because if you're looking at just general overall health, your protein intake is going to differ from any of those that I mentioned before, the activity level or the muscle mass.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that, or do you have anything to add? Or
Actually, I do agree with that. Like pretty much everything that you said. But I think what I want to do is I want to try to help whoever's listening to this kind of categorize themselves a little bit better so they
yeah,
know roughly what they should be aiming towards. Or let's say if they are satisfied with what they're currently eating, what are the trade-offs potentially that they are missing out on, right? So let's say we talk about the recommended daily allowance. I
hmm
think the first thing to understand is there's a difference between a survivable amount and what would help your body kind of function at a very um maybe optimize is not the best word to use here, but like a very high level where it doesn't affect your daily quality of life. It actually enhances your daily quality of life. Because at the end of the day, we eat healthily because we want to have, the enough energy. We want our body to stay healthy so that we can continue doing all the things that we want to do. And so you could get away with the lowest recommended amount, but as age catches up, that's very likely to not be sufficient. So you could survive, your body could continue, surviving, and you could continue existing, but a lot of your other daily functions, your quality of life might drop because you might experience a lot more sarcopenia, your muscle mass might not be able to be maintained as well, you might experience weakness and all this kind of stuff that ultimately makes for not such a pleasant lifestyle. So I would say for most people, you want to start with the general health recommendation of, especially if you're over 40, of what Mike was saying, right? The middle range.
yeah,
And that was, I believe, what, 0.8 to
no,
1
1 to 1.2.
Oh, sorry, 1 to 1.2. Yeah.
Mm.
So 1 to 1.2, that will be the range you want to start off at. Okay, if you are doing a lot of running, let's say, for example, a lot of cardio-based activities, you were active in sport. And when I say running, maybe something like every day you are running for 30 minutes or so, there probably would be a bit more efficacy for you to kind of go towards the 1.2 gram per kilo range. So on the higher end of the range. Okay. But as long as you stay within that range, I think you should be fine. Okay, so this is just for like general activity, maybe a bit higher cardio activity. You probably will still be able to retain a decent amount of muscle mass just from having that enough protein. And then the fact that you're very active is going to stimulate the muscles enough that you will have some degree of muscle retention. Okay, so I think that's for that particular group and where most people should be sitting in. Now, if you want to actually get stronger and really bulletproof or participate in what I like to call anti-aging activities, which is lifting weights and doing more resistance training to kind of make your body more resilient as you get older, then you would definitely need to start going beyond that 1.2. But the cool thing is actually it doesn't have to be very much more. So you're literally talking about like again that 1.54 to the 1.54 range, right? To up to 22.2.
Mm.
The funny thing is that right now there's been a lot of newer research that's kind of come out and has shown that actually beyond 2.2 kilos, you don't really have any extra benefits in terms of taking more protein in. All right, most of that is likely to just end up being converted into energy in some way or form. But at the same time, also, the reason why I think this higher end of the range has been perpetrated a lot by bodybuilding or strength training and all, it's just because of earlier days where they started pushing protein supplements and all of that. And so then from that marketing kind of angle where they say, okay, you need this amount in order to really get jacked, to really put on muscle, to really retain whatever. And I was a huge believer of that as well. In fact, when I was trying to bulk up, trying to put on muscle, I was eating upwards of 2 point, I think almost three grams per kilo, something of that nature. 3 grams to almost 3.5 grams per kilo, which is totally unnecessary. You don't have to do that. It still worked out really well for me. But could I have done it better and so I've eaten less of that? Maybe. But I think without digressing too much onto that fact, like 2.2 is really the upper end limit. So 2.2 is like a catch-all. I've done my best with the protein amounts and that's it. Like you cannot do any more for protein. You cannot take in any more protein to try to speed up your gain. So then you're better else looking at other areas of your diet, other areas of your training, of your lifestyle and recovery to kind of maximize your results further. Um, so if you're very active, you're training in the gym, let's say 3 times a week, 4 times a week, right? And you're training pretty hard, then yeah, I would say maybe you might want to start to go around maybe 1.6, because the bottom end was 1.54, right? So maybe 1.6 grams per kilo. I think that's probably good enough for most people. Yeah, and I think like based on the actual physiological recommendation, that's what I would get most people to kind of stay at. Now, is there a reason why we might still push for higher levels of protein towards the 2.2 grams per kilo, like that higher end range? Yes, there is, but it's actually not because of the like the science-backed recommendation of why we want to get in more protein to get more recovery and stuff. It's actually more to do with a practical application. Because if you eat more protein, what happens is that protein in and of itself has a higher thermic effect. And what thermic effect is that whatever whatever nutrient you ingest, there's a certain amount of calorie energy requirement that is required to break it down. And so let's say if I eat 100 grams of 100 calories of carbs or 100 calories of fats, the amount of energy required to break those down range roughly between like 4 to 8%. So that means that if I eat 100 calories of fats, for example, only about four calories of that is used to break down the fats, so that it can be stored. Which means that the net out of the 100 calories, I'm still taking majority. It's like 96 calories, right? So pretty much the full thing. Then if I eat 100 calories of carbs, it's maybe a bit lower, around 92, but it's still a large majority of those calories. Protein takes about 30% thermic effect efficiency.
Oh, that's a big difference.
But that's a big difference, right? So it means if you eat 100 calories of the protein, out of that 100 calories, that 30, close to 30% or close to 30 calories is used to kind of in the process of breaking it down. So now your net from the amount of protein is already 70 calories. So let's say if you overate a bit more on protein, you already have this safety buffer of how much calories you're net ingesting into your body. So in essence, you're actually still having a lower calorie intake as opposed to, let's say, a higher calorie intake, perceptibly, if it was the same amount of calories extra that you're eating, compared to carbs or fats. So that's
Mm.
the first thing for a practical consideration.
So if I just jump in there quick,
Yes, please.
when you're talking about thermic value, right?
Yeah.
My concern is that people are listening to this and then they're like, oh, so all I need to do is just eat more protein and the thermic value is I'm going to melt away weight. So there is actually a pyramid on what contributes to weight loss, and I think thermic
Yep.
values is is not one of the major contributors
Yeah,
to focus
yeah.
on.
It's
Just
not
for
it's not
clarity
even
here, I
yeah,
think
it's
this needs
not
to be
even
said.
a contributor at all.
Yeah.
Because I think the misconception people have from this is that it's a negative calorie thing. There's no such thing. There's no such food that's negative calorie. It doesn't mean you eat this food, you burn more.
Yep.
There's no such thing. Let's put it out there first. What I'm saying is that you eat this food, this protein food, out of the 100 calories, you're actually getting a net of 70 into your body. So it's still a plus.
Mm.
It's not a minus, it's still a plus. Yeah. So it's like if I paid, it's basically like tax, right? Think of thermic effect as tax. You
Yeah.
buy this thing or you earn this amount of money, but the government still takes a certain amount. But in this case, it's a good thing for you, for your body, right? The government being your metabolism and your body. So yeah, so that's really the main practical consideration we always advise. Like, okay, let's go a bit on the high end of the protein intake
Mm.
because that leads to the next practical consideration as well, which is when you're selecting for a lot more of these like higher lean protein foods, they tend to come in dishes which tend to be like slightly lower in calories anyway. So I give you an example. In Singapore, one of the most common, like if you go to a hawker center and you want to get something that's relatively high in protein, might go for something like fish soup. So you go for fish soup, you add some extra fish, you get a decent amount of like fish slices and stuff, but it's pretty much just soup and some veggies in there. A bit like it tastes great, but the amount of calories you're actually taking is pretty low. If you want to get some other options, you could go to like a chicken rice stall. And since those are a bit, separable, what you could do is you could ask for a bit less rice, you could ask for all these little customizations, adding a bit extra meat, and it ends up making the dish a lot more calorie friendly and also macro friendly. Now your protein's higher as well. So the choices that you would tend to make when you're searching for higher protein foods tend to lead to just overall a lower calorie intake in general.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the main reason why sometimes we just give clients a bit of a higher protein intake above what the so-called target tends to be, because it tends to fill them up a lot more while for lower calories, and it makes that weight loss journey a bit easier without being outright like, oh, I need to watch every single calorie that I'm tracking and whatever.
Yeah, I think that becomes when you start becoming anal about these calorie intake, I think your quality of life starts to go down because you're so stressed about trying to
Yeah,
count. So if I like the idea of having the general guidelines and you follow the general guidelines rather than actual counting the calories.
yeah,
Um, you see the results, maybe not as fast as if you were counting every specific calorie, but you still see the
yeah.
results, but with quality of life, as I like to
But
put
with
it.
quality of life, yeah, there's
Yeah.
there's a lot more balance to that because as long as you set like a protein target for the day and you say, okay, cool, this is something I'm going to focus on. This is something my keystone habit here I'm going to focus on and get it done. Every day. Your calorie intake will fluctuate up and down. But over time, what's the natural progression is that you end up feeling a lot more fuller. Your own cravings, your own hunger signals tend to regulate a bit better. Because one of the byproducts of eating more protein foods is that they give you a higher satiety signaling. So you can eat lesser, but still feel relatively full.
Okay. Just before we jump onto the next section, when you were mentioning earlier about taking in the 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram
Yeah.
of protein, you touched on the topic of sarcopenia.
Yes.
Perhaps for those that are not familiar with the term, you could just give a very brief understanding of what that
Yeah.
is.
Sarcopenia is just basically the age-related muscle loss that we experience. So again, as we age, very naturally our body is actually degrading. And we talked about this like right at the start, right? Where the amount of protein breakdown that's happening in the body exceeds the amount of protein build up. And so to kind of fight against that, we need to do the things that will help with the protein build up component. That means taking in more protein, and then not only taking in more protein, that's only one part of the equation, but also doing the activities that will help trigger your body to build build more of these protein structures in terms of rebuilding cells, tissues, muscles, all these stuff. Yeah, and then that means lifting weights. That means lifting weights, doing some sort of resistance training. You need the muscles to strain against something, and you need it to always be like challenged. Yeah, so lifting weights is really the easiest way to go about it, like the simplest in the sense that you can see it measurably. I lift this amount of weight for this number of reps this week. Next week, maybe I do a few more reps, the week after that, I add a bit more weight. So it's very progressional. But it doesn't have to be. It could be something as simple as like if you're starting from I can't do body weight stuff, even just getting to a first push-up, then doing 10, then doing 20 will already gain you quite a lot of good gains. So there's plenty of calisthenic stuff. I think those for general health, a lot like calisthenic stuff is great for just, keeping you healthy and mobile as you age. It doesn't necessarily have to be weights also, because your body can act as weight itself.
Okay. So
Yeah.
sarcopenia, as you state, is just the degradation of muscle, where we generally lose about 1% of muscle mass per year after the age of
Mm.
40.
After 40, yeah.
So, as Tone is suggesting here, is to counter that, we bring in some element of resistance training to try and ensure that we can help maintain, or maybe in some cases, build a little bit of muscle mass on top of that as we age, rather
Yeah.
than it all degrading and becoming
If you
an issue
if
later
you
in
don't
life.
use it, you lose it.
Yeah.
Like this is the most perfect example of that. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the topic that I'm sure everybody wants to hear, and that is the protein sources.
Mm.
What would you
Protein.
say is your go-to protein source, other than protein shakes, of course? Let's talk food first, whole foods.
Yeah. Well, I mean I'm a meat guy, right? So any kind of meat is probably going to be the best, most complete amino acid profile that you can get. Yeah, I like that's it. Pretty much that. There's eggs
Done.
as
That's
well.
podcast done.
Yeah, podcast done. That's it. No, but I'm sure. I mean, some people have concerns, right? Red meat and whatever, and all this sort of stuff. I would say that in terms of red meat being an issue, it's actually not really an issue for most people, provided you don't have some pre-existing conditions. And also the type of red meat that you're kind of taking in, if it's like a lot of sausages, a lot of like smoked stuff and all, that generally has some higher risks in terms of, I think, like high cancer risk, things like this. But again, the cancer risk difference is like statistically the cancer risk difference might be something like I think 50% or something extra, right? Like 50% extra. But if you look at the actual risk, like let's say your cancer risk is only 4%, right? 50% extra is like it brings you up to 6%, something of that nature. And I think it's not even 4%. I think like cancer risk is something like 2 point something percent. So it maybe goes from like 2% or 3%, So probably shouldn't worry too much about that. I think just being like not being active and being overly fat are the things that cause a lot more of these all mortality issues. Yeah. So meat, any kind of lean meats, chicken, fish, beef, red meat stuff. Now I'm in Sydney here. I like kangaroo as well. Yeah. So
It's just
so yeah,
springing your
that's
step,
where I
is
generally
it?
get the sauces from. I think eggs as well. I mean I used to eat a lot of eggs, but I used to eat more eggs when I was trying to just be economical and also quick, with my meals. But yeah, I actually don't eat as much eggs nowadays, surprisingly. Yeah.
What if you had to jump into vegetarian options?
Vegetarian options, I would say most of like you pretty much only have like one, and I'm putting this in inverted commas because this is like this is the most efficient vegetarian sauce. It's anything soy based. And honestly, you would probably want to like if you're really trying to control your calories, you probably want to supplement with like a soy-based protein powder. So that will probably be the best option there. There are plenty of other options too, don't get me wrong. Any kind of legumes. So you're talking all the beans stuff, right? Your black beans, your chickpeas, your what else? Lentils. All these sauces tend to be really, really good as well in terms of like providing some decent amino acids and protein with a good amino acid profile. The issue is that they are not majority of the calories from proteins. So let's say if you eat 100 grams of the chickpeas, for example, right? I think pretty much like half of that is from fat, maybe 20% of that is from like carbs, and then only the remaining 30% from protein. So it does give you some protein. But if you're looking for things that are protein rich, that's not exactly protein rich, right? Because it's less than 50% of it. Yeah. So
Okay.
vegetarians definitely do have it a little bit harder. It's not impossible. You can still get a lot of protein from vegetarian food sources. You just have to be really mindful about, okay, this is the volume I need to ingest, and be a bit more um how would I say, a bit more specific about like whether you're hitting a protein targets or not. Whereas like something like, chicken breast would be pretty much all protein,
Yeah.
egg whites, all protein. You could easily eat that and be like, yeah, cool. I know I've gotten this amount of protein.
Okay. So with that advice that you just given there, what if we were to break it into financial categories, right? We have a maybe
Oh
a
yeah.
budget, and then we have a mid to upper tier. Just give the two camps. Let's not worry about going
Mm.
too drastic. But if we have a budget option in order to get in all this protein, and then we have a mid to upper tier finances, how would you advise each one with each budget?
So so when we say lower budget, I'm assuming you're asking about like protein sources that don't cost as much
Yeah.
per gram of protein. So I mean, I will use that definition because that's how I calculated it a lot. And I've done this before for clients, right? Which is, if you're looking for like cheaper sources of protein, for the most part, chicken breast is probably one of the cheapest sources that has a decent quality to it. In the sense of, it's a bit more fresh meat, and then, can cook it up. Yeah, it's a great option. So I'll say chicken breast. There are some white fish that are cheaper. You have like ling fillets, you have I forgot what's the other one called basa fillets, things like this, which are also cheaper. These are all along the lines of maybe costing anywhere between 10 to, I think, $15 per kilo. So they are very, affordable options. If you want even cheaper than that, so this is what I used to do when I was a like secondary school kid to, a college kind of kid, trying to get all my protein intake while, being economical about it. Tuna and eggs. Honestly,
Yeah.
tuna and eggs are the best for getting the protein. You can get creative with it, how you season the tuna, what sort of sauces you put, things like this. But yeah, tuna and eggs, like tuna cans, sometimes you get like $1 tuna cans if it's on sale, 150. One can of tuna is probably something like 40 grams of protein in there, so it's a pretty decent chunk. So there's that, like that's all in the lower end range. Now, the other thing that I would say, the number one thing that's pretty much the most economical plus convenient would honestly be protein powder. And this is where I would really recommend protein powder in that sense, because per gram of protein that you're getting, the cost per gram is actually really, really good. In fact, it's probably lower than chicken breast,
Yes,
or
it
at the very
is.
least comparable, depending on where you're staying, and how much you're paying for your protein powder. But it's probably very comparable. Like right now in Singapore, I did a calculation recently for another client, and I know the protein powder prices have been like going up, because it tends to fluctuate a little bit. But even with it going up, it still is cheaper. I think per gram of protein, it's like something like point 0.5. No, sorry. I think something like 5.6 cents for protein powder versus like chicken breast, which would be something along the lines of 6.1 cents per gram. I mean, it's a difference, but it's still cheaper, you know. So I would say protein powder is probably the best budget option that you have, and then you just use it to supplement whatever else you're having on the solid protein side. So that's the budget side. Like, does that make sense to you, Mike?
Yeah. I'm just sorry. I'm just trying to call up a spreadsheet that I did years ago, where I also did a bit of a dive into it. Um, so where is it now? Yeah, my price per gram. This is in Malaysia, obviously, for
Yeah.
whey protein came to zero, basically 12 cents It cost me
Mm.
12 cents per gram of protein, right?
12 cents in Malaysian ringgit or
In Malaysian ringgit. So
so that would
that
be
needs
about
to be
four
taken into account.
cents in Sing.
So,
So it is pretty much close enough to what I calculated, I think.
mm. So if I broke it down into chicken breast was, and this was a more expensive protein, right? Protein
Yeah,
powder. It wasn't like your lower one.
yeah.
Chicken breast at the time, but prices have gone up now. But at the time, this was probably about 8 years ago, was about 7 cents per gram
Yeah,
of
it's probably
protein.
something like 10 or 11
Mm.
now.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think it's quite close. Tuna is 15 cents, or was 15 cents.
Hmm.
Uh, mince, like beef mince, was 20 cents
Oh,
per
that's
gram.
actually cheaper, I think, than compared to Singapore. Yeah.
Mm. So, but basically, what I'm getting at is that when you break it down to per gram, as what you were highlighting here,
Yeah.
it does paint a different picture compared to when you have to go buy your protein pack. You know, it's like, wow, it
Yes.
costs so much. When
Yes.
you break it
Yes.
down to per meal and how much grams you're getting out of each meal, it does paint a different picture. So I do agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. So if you're on a budget really, like right now, so last time I think protein powder used to be a lot more expensive last time, mainly because distribution channels and all were not as vast.
Hmm.
But that's like look like right now we're in the age of everything's ordered online, right? So I like protein powder is still way cheaper, or it has come down a lot in cost in that sense. So if you break it down, it's like the most affordable option pretty much to get in high quality protein. Like protein powder is very, very good quality. It's essentially the runoff from making cheese that they've then filter out into the powder form. Yeah, and that's like super high bioavailable protein. So generally, it's really good for it's generally good for you. Yeah.
Okay. So if we jump back to the Whole Foods, right?
Yes.
And we're still talking in the budget options here.
Yep.
How important is organic for protein sources?
Oh, actually, I don't think it's important at all, to be honest. Like, it's not something I would even really consider because at the same time, also like organic is such a catch-all term. What exactly does organic mean? When you're applying it to foods, you know. And there's no true definition. If you actually go and look up like what organic means under the food regulations themselves, there's a whole huge paragraph built out to kind of describe what organic means. That kind of has a catch-all for everything, and as long as like maybe let's say if it's like um plants, right? You don't use certain pesticides, it's considered organic, things like this. So I'm not too sure exactly what organic means, and I think sometimes people are very scared of like genetically modified, crops and things like this, even for livestock and all, where they say, oh, they might put growth hormones into the chicken and all this kind of stuff. I I think that's a lot of fear mongering because of the concept and the idea of the what do you call the natural fallacy, naturalistic fallacy, right? Where this thing isn't natural, so it's not good for me. Like that's a fallacy in thinking. Okay, we have to look at the object and the item in itself, see what's the effects, and
Mm.
then make that decision rather than just say like, oh, this thing's not natural, because there's plenty of natural things that can kill you. You know, there's plenty of natural things like cyanide's natural, it's naturally occurring in apple seeds, right? Does that mean it's good for you? Nah. So everything is just like it's all about the dose that makes the poison, which is a good thing because our bodies are so resilient that it takes a decent amount of dosing of certain chemicals to cause any actual harm. Because imagine if our bodies were not like this and something is really just like poisonous for us,
Mm.
we would just die. I don't think our species would survive as long as it did. Yeah.
Exactly.
So there's that. I don't think organic's really important, especially if you look like if you're overweight, you're trying to get your health in order. The last thing you need to worry about is like, am I getting organic food? Especially if organic, by tagging on that marketing term, allows them to jack up the price and mark up the price a lot. Now it becomes a lot more cost prohibitive, right? And then you might be thinking, oh no, I can't buy this stuff. You don't have to. It's not crucial. Yeah.
Okay. I
So that's
think for
my
me
my
is
little rant over, I guess.
organic only really comes into play is when you're talking about things like berries or things where you're
Yes.
consuming the outer as well as the inner. But I think
Yeah.
when it
There
comes
definitely is
to protein
some
sources,
stuff there.
um, I think we've been marketed well to, I think. Is it better to go for a free range organic so-called protein? Probably yes, but does that mean that the non-free range organic protein source is going to kill you? No. So if
Yeah,
that's what you can afford, that's the better protein to go for at this particular time.
yeah,
So as long as you're just getting in that your protein, I think that's what's most important for now.
yeah.
But
I
if we
think one
go
thing
and
a
we
lot of
jump from
people,
the budgets and
sorry,
we
just
jump
one last
into
thing to add there. I think
sure.
one thing a lot of people fail to realize is that like making the big move of getting leaner and healthier
Mhm.
contributes a lot more to the health aspect, and in that sense makes a lot of these minor things less, less impactful.
That's a good point.
Yeah, because now your body is like so much healthier, you can handle a lot more.
Mm,
Like you could eat something that's like not organic and whatever. Let's say there's a little bit of I don't know, whatever external toxicity residue or that's residual in the food items itself, but that buildup was not going to impact you as much because the tolerance level will probably be higher as well.
mm,
Yeah.
that's fair. Okay.
Yeah. So just aim at getting healthy first, like you don't
Yeah.
have to worry about the protein
Yeah.
being organic or not.
Okay. So are there any differences for a mid to high tier that you would recommend compared to the budget that you're
I
recommending?
would say mid to high tier is more to do with the type of meat that you're taking in because just meat in general, I know in where I used to live in Singapore, right? Like it's expensive just because everything's imported in. Um, so even seafood, all this kind of stuff. But if you live in an area where the meat's cheaper and you can make it work within your budget, I don't see why it would really rank up as high. Although I do think in general, like the higher cuts of meat or the more expensive cuts of meat tend to be, at least in my experience right now, it tends to be a lot more, aside from let's say stuff like the filet mignon, right, of for beef, for example, a lot of it tends to be just like really expensive beef cuts that are like ribeyes, or any of those fancy meats, kurobuta pork, things like this, that they import from all different areas and sell with that kind of premium to them. Those probably wouldn't be part of your regular diet anyway. Like you would buy that and you eat that like not because I want to get the protein in, but because I want to enjoy that piece of meat, you know. So
Yeah.
you do that and you'll be like, cool, I get some protein in at the same time. So that's a great double, killing two birds with one stone kind of deal.
Yeah, so really the only difference between the budget and the mid to high tier is the taste of food, not so much the quality of food. Uh,
Not too much, yeah, not too much the quality. I would caveat that with by saying that you still want to watch out on like how fatty the food is, right? Because the meat sources tend to come with some sort of fat in them. And that's why we always stress, and I'm stressing right now, lean meats. Like if you want to get your protein in, make sure that meats are as lean as you can get. So for pork, it's like you got to get pork loins. For chicken is generally quite lean. So even if you get like a chicken breast or chicken thigh, you're still pretty good, it's not that big of a difference in that sense. The chicken thigh is still great. There's some additional meat, but if you additional fats, but if you trim it off, you're good. And then if it's beef, you want to make sure you're getting stuff like flank or what else? Like extra lean stir fry, extra lean mince, things like this. Yeah.
hmm,
And then
okay.
fish. Fish is a great lean option as well in general. And most shellfish are actually a underrated protein option.
I actually saw an infographic 2 days ago that showed how many calories per protein that you're getting.
Mhm.
And what was it? Prawns. Was it prawns or shrimp? One of those two actually came out with the least amount of calories per gram of protein that you're
Yeah.
getting. I always
Yeah.
thought that they would be quite high, but I thought the chicken breast would be lower, but apparently not. I found that quite interesting, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just because if you're talking about the meat of like so if you eat prawns, just make sure you're eating like the body and you're
Mm.
not like, smashing the prawn head or drinking all the prawn head
Eating
juice
all
and
the good
stuff.
stuff, is it?
Yeah, I mean that's all the good stuff, right? Like I love that too. So
Yeah.
yeah, but the shrimp bodies themselves, like those are really, really good lean protein sources.
Okay. Well, that's a nice one because you touched there on fats, and I think we can probably close with this particular topic, and that is bringing in the importance of balancing your protein with your fats and your carbs. Like
Yeah,
how important is bringing in carbs and all that kind of stuff in like with protein synthesis or protein digestion or all these kind of things. Like if I know generally we look at it as if you up your protein, it's a good idea to up your fiber at the same time. And one of the ways to do that is with some kinds of carbohydrates. What
yeah.
would you suggest in this regard?
Um, I think, okay, let me speak to the point about upping the fiber when you up your protein. I think that's super important. You need to make sure you're getting in your fiber. But it actually doesn't, it's also an independent thing, independent of like increased protein intake. Like you should be increasing your protein intake and you should be increasing your fiber regardless. Most people don't have enough of both. So you could, so even if, let's say you weren't increasing your protein intake, you should still increase your fiber because most people don't eat enough fiber in the first place.
Yeah.
Like the recommended daily allowance for fiber is like not as not as high as actually no, sorry, it's actually pretty decent. It's around like 25 grams of fiber to
Yes.
30 grams, something like this. I think for women and then men it's maybe something like 35 grams, which is pretty decent. You could probably optimize that up further, closer to like 45 or so. But also depends on your stomach and all. But the main point is you got to increase your fiber anyway, right? And then increase the protein, and all these things will balance out. But to the idea of like, okay, let's say the carbs and the fats, we're gonna have like future topics where we talk specifically about carbs, specifically about fats. So we'll break those down in more detail. But in terms of the function, proteins serve that function of muscle repair, sorry, tissue repair, right? As we started off this podcast with, we talked about this function. And carbs and fats kind of come in for their own functions as well. I would say between the two, very broadly, that if you probably want to make sure you're getting enough fats in, just because there's a lot of processes in the body that actually kind of require a bit more fats, right? We need some like fats at a certain level for them to actually kind of function well, because there's certain vitamins and stuff that are more fat soluble. If you don't have enough fat kind of coming in, hormone production also tends to drop down. All these kind of essential things. Okay, so a certain amount of fat is going to be necessary. The good news is that if you're taking in like your protein sources from already from even the leaner protein options that we talked about,
Yep.
you're probably getting quite a bunch of residual fats. And then if you cook them, you have a bit of oil here and there, you're already getting enough fats there, most likely. If you're eating a lot of your food outside, you are definitely going to get a decent amount of fats already. So you probably don't need to worry about bringing in extra fats in that sense.
Yep.
If you're eating very vegetarian sources of protein, you probably are getting a decent amount of like fats from the plants already. Like if you're eating all the legumes, that will be your main protein sources. You have a decent amount of fats coming in from there. So a lot of times these things are self-balancing in its nature. And then the only other thing left to consider is like, okay, what's my goal? Am I trying to maintain my weight? Am I trying to lose some weight? Am I trying to gain some weight? Then you alter the whether you need to get in additional fats and whether like how much carbs you actually need to kind of take in. Yeah.
Mm.
Then that will kind of balance it out to the total amount of calories you're taking in. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's kind of they're relatively independent of each other in that sense. Although yes, you do need, a certain amount of fats for some of these proteins, to kind of like to develop certain hormones which the proteins themselves make up, right? And so that's the interdependency we're talking about. But you don't actually need to be super critical about pulling in a lot more fats or eating extra fats just because you're increasing your protein intake. Yeah.
Yeah.
This kind of how I would say it.
Yeah. I mean,
What
I
do
would
you
agree with it. It's independent. But for me, the only part why I mentioned that is because, and you did touch on the point, is that we generally don't take in enough fiber.
Yeah.
On average, I think the person takes in about 8 to 12 grams of fiber per day, I think is what the one study showed.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
as you say, we're supposed to be taking anywhere from 25 to 32 grams of fiber per day, depending on your needs and body lifestyle.
Yeah. And your
So
size.
that's a little bit under what we're supposed to be going after. Now, the reason why I brought it up and why I connected the two is that oftentimes we equate bad blood markers and all these kind of things because we're eating too much meat.
Okay.
So generally, when we're eating too much meat, and then we advise people, oh, you're actually not eating enough. You need to eat more meat to increase your protein. In this kind of topic of what we're talking about today, I'll always connect the two in this regard. It says like, okay, we're suggesting that you should take in and increase your protein, and we're suggesting that the good options are these particular meats that you should take.
Hmm.
But I would caveat that with, okay, if you're increasing that, make sure to increase your fiber intake. Because
Yeah.
one, yes, like you pointed out, and I also said, we are all under consuming our actual fiber. So if we can increase that and get to the actual, not even asking you to be in surplus, but just be the RDA, the recommended daily allowance of
Yeah.
say 25 grams, that's already going to help a lot more with regards to these kind of things. And it can probably help to take away the misunderstanding that meat is evil. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we could do a whole different topic, a whole podcast on cholesterol and stuff, because I think the main issue for fiber, it's mostly related to cholesterol markers. We
yeah,
could probably do like a topic on that and podcast. I mean, if you guys want to hear that, just let us know in the comments as well. If there's any interest in that. But yeah, yeah. I mean, Mike's absolutely right that there's this misconception between, eating too much meat and then having all sorts of health risks and poor blood markers. But the reality is that to be very, very frank, a lot of poor blood markers tend to come from um other poor lifestyle choices, and mostly the state of which lead to a very poor state of body. So it could be that you're overfat, it could be that you have higher visceral fat, you might not be super overweight, but you have higher visceral fat. All these things which then take into account like, okay, how active you are, what kind of exercise are you doing, how are you taking care of the body. So the food aspect that we talked about right here is just one aspect. Could you improve on that? For sure. But there's all these other factors to consider as well. So it's not a one size fits all, right? But
yes, that's true.
there's a lot of very good general wisdom that we could start from. And then I think once you start from there, then the individuality kind of starts to come in, where you can start to say, okay, I've tried this thing. How can I make it a little bit better for myself? Because I notice this is how my body reacts to me doing this thing.
That's right. So, I mean, the thing is, well, let me start off with this one first. There was a doctor that was on a talk show, and the people were saying, "Is like, oh, should you eat this? Should you eat it?" And he replied and he said, "There's no single food that causes cancer. So, in order to get cancer, it's a whole body of lifestyle choices and everything that are playing a part, and everything is just contributing its part in order to get to that undesired outcome."
Yeah.
So that was quite interesting, a way of putting it. And I was like, oh, I must remember this. And thankfully, I remembered it now. But there's no single food that causes cancer, but it's the lifestyle that can contribute to it, with a number of things that are all going on in your lifestyle. Then the second part that I also just wanted to mention was oh yeah, that's escaping me. Let me show my age. Um, what was it now? Ah, obviously, couldn't have been that important. I forgot.
No, but the idea about yeah, I think the lifestyle component and then having a doctor say that, I think it's really, really good, because
Yeah.
nowadays you have all these like diet gurus and stuff that, I mean, to be honest, they make the industry in that sense. They give us a bit more work to kind of clear up in that sense. But I would rather that the nutritional misinformation doesn't get spread. But it is what it is, right? People will gravitate towards all that. So you, the listener who's listening to this right now, at least you know better.
Yes. Hopefully, we've contributed in small part
Yeah,
to that.
hopefully we contributed in a positive way to the side of fighting misinformation.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
I think we've covered everything.
awesome. So that
If there's
that's
anything else
protein.
that, yeah, if there's anything else that we have not covered today in the topic of protein, do let us know, and we can always come
Yes,
back with a part two.
for sure, for sure. I mean, we'd love to continue the chat about protein. I mean, it's the one thing that, like, when I first started lifting, it's the first thing I learned about, right? And it's like everywhere you need to go, you need to get enough protein in and all this sort of stuff. And along the ways, I made all those mistakes, overeating my protein when I didn't really need to. But the good thing is that the upper limits for protein intake are really, really, really high. So most people will not ever hit a range where there will be any ill, effects on the body, even if they eat in excess. So it's very, very, yeah, it's very safe in a sense. But yeah, if you guys have any further questions, let us know.
Awesome. All right. As always, thanks, Twain, for the chat.
No worries, Mike. Always good to chat.
And we'll catch you in the next one.
That's it.